Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Managing and Automating Calls with Microsoft Lync Server 2013. In this video, you'll be introduced to the enterprise voice call management features that will be used at Carverock Fitness. Microsoft Lync 2013 allows us to park calls. It also allows us to play announcements for unassigned extensions. And we'll also see how to use automated call distribution through the use of response groups. The first feature that we're going to look at is called Call Park. Call Park enables an enterprise voice-enabled user the ability to put a call on hold. Well, it's a little bit different than just putting a call on hold, because when you put a call on hold, the call remains on your line. If you park a call, the call gets transferred over to a temporary extension called an orbit number. In order to retrieve that call later, you dial the internal number, and this allows you to dial that number from any device. So if I were to park a call, somebody else could pull that call by dialing in the orbit number. To understand how Call Park works, we should understand the prerequisites for using Call Park and also the user rights that are typically assigned through role-based access control. In order to use Call Park, it requires that we have an application service that your Call Park app runs on top of. Well, we also need the Call Park application. We don't really have to worry too much about these, because as soon as we've enabled Enterprise Voice at Carverock Fitness, these were deployed automatically. What we do have to worry about is the configuration of our orbit range or the orbit table. We can also substitute the default music on hold file with one of our own. We can upload an audio file into the application services pool, pool.carverockfitness.com. To administer Call Park, we'll use the Lync Server control panel and the management shell. In order to configure Call Park, you could be a member of the CS Administrators group, but that's our top-level admin group. If we need somebody to be able to configure enterprise voice settings, but we don't need them to be a top-level admin, you could also add them into the CS Voice Administrators group because these people can configure the enterprise voice settings, and Call Park falls into that category. To deploy Call Park, we have to start off by creating a range of extensions that can be used for parking calls. And then we associate that range of extensions with our pool, either the pool in Phoenix or the pool in Scottsdale. To create a range of extensions used for parking calls, we have to create an orbit table, and this is done either through the control panel or you can use the new-cs call park orbit commandlet through the Lync Server management shell. Once you have created your range of extensions that can be used to park or retrieve calls, we then configure Call Park settings, and this has to be done using the command line. And during my demonstration, you'll see an example. You'll use the set-cs cps configuration commandlet. This commandlet will allow me to configure settings such as if I want to enable music on hold, or how long a call can be parked. Once we have Call Park configured and deployed, we have to enable Call Park in the voice policy of the users. If you remember, Call Park is not enabled by default inside of your voice policies. When we define the orbit table, we have some general rules that we have to follow. A pool can have a maximum of 50,000 orbit extensions, and a range can have a maximum of 10,000 orbits. The value of the beginning number of the range has to be the same length as the ending number of the range. So the number of digits that you're using has to be equivalent. You also have to make sure that you're not causing any conflicts by using overlapping extensions across your ranges. A Call Park extension can be up to 8 digits in length. If you're using all numbers, the first digit cannot be a 0, it can be the numbers 1 through 9. All the other digits can be 0 through 9. The first digit can also be a pound sign or an asterisk. To configure the Call Park settings, you have to use the command line interface, set-cs cps configuration. You'll see this in the demonstration. This will allow me to configure settings such as if I'm going to enable music on hold, and also how long a call can be parked, which defaults to 90 seconds. If a call is not retrieved after 90 seconds, the default settings dictate that the call will ring back to the original callee one time. And if they don't service the call, we can define an on-timeout URI, which is an alternate SIP address where the call gets routed to. So if I park a call and it sits for 90 seconds, it rings back to my phone. And if I don't retrieve the call can then get routed over to another line, like the operator. I'd like to show you how we're going to configure Call Park at Carverock Fitness. Let's take a look at a demonstration. To configure Call Park, we're going to start by opening up our Lync Server control panel. And then we'll provide our credentials for administrator. I'm going to connect over to my pool over in Scottsdale. Pool number 2 is for Phoenix. So we'll connect to pool.carverockfitness.com, and we're connecting over to the CSCP virtual directory for the control panel. We'll put in our credentials. And then from inside of the control panel, we'll navigate over to voice features. You can see that I currently have call park selected, and I've set up two ranges of extensions for parking calls, one for the pool in Phoenix and one for the pool in Scottsdale. Let's take a look at our Scottsdale pool. You can see that I've created a call park number range called Scottsdale. The number range is from #100 up to #300. So if you are a user that's homed over in Scottsdale and you park a call, you should expect to see a call park orbit extension coming from this range. And down below you can see the FQDN of the destination server or the pool that will be using that call park range. Now keep in mind that if you have a pool with multiple servers, those servers are working together as a group and they're sharing application configuration, such as with call park. Let's take a look at configuring the call park services configuration through the Lync Server management shell. Here we're going to open up our Lync Server management shell. And from inside of the Lync Server management shell, we're going to take a look at the call park services configuration. You'll notice the commandlet that I'm using, get-cs cps configuration. Now if I wanted to modify the settings, I could use the set commandlet. You can see that I currently only have one call park service configuration and it's being applied globally. My call pickup timeout threshold is set to 1 minute and 30 seconds. So if you park a call, it can only be parked for a maximum of 90 seconds before it will ring back to your phone, and you can see the maximum call pickup attempts is 1 time. So if you were to park a call, if that call does not get retrieved after 90 seconds, it rings back to your phone 1 time. And after that point, the call can get disconnected, or it can get routed to an on-timeout URI. And as you see here, I don't have one configured yet, but we're going to alter that so it routes the calls over to the operator. So if a call is parked too long, we'll let that call get routed back to the operator. You can also see that Enable Music on Hold is set to true. It's currently enabled, and we're using the default Music on Hold file. If we choose to, we can customize the music on hold by using the set-cs call park service music on hold file commandlet. Now that you've seen how to configure call park, let's take a look at configuring announcements. Microsoft Lync Server also allows us to configure announcements for phone calls that come into the organization for valid extensions that aren't assigned to users. So instead of a call just getting disconnected or the user dialing up and hearing a busy tone, we can play a message for them, and we can also determine what is going to happen with that call, whether it gets disconnected, or we can forward the call to a predetermined phone number, SIP URI, or a voicemail. When you configure the announcements inside of Microsoft Lync, it allows us to determine how calls coming into unassigned numbers get handled. When you create the announcement, you can import audio files for your announcement, so we can play a prompt that's a result of an audio file that's been imported into our application pool. We can also use text-to-speech prompts. There's two commandlets. Import-cs announcement file is used to import an audio file into the application store. We can also use the new-cs announcement commandlet, and that allows us to use the text-to-speech prompt. Microsoft Lync Server allows us to configure how to handle calls coming into unassigned phone numbers within the organization. They're valid phone numbers, they're just not being used. To configure the handling of such calls, we have to set up an unassigned number table. And through the use of this table, we can determine how calls coming in get routed. Do they get handled by announcements, or do we route the calls over to the Exchange Unified Messaging Server? Inside of your unassigned number table, we can have a range of extensions that includes the entire organization. So if someone were to call your company and they dial an extension that's not being used, we could have a very generic announcement. Thanks for calling Carverock Fitness. Unfortunately, you dialed an invalid extension. Please hold while we route your call to an operator. We can also provide very specific announcements. For example, if you change the extension of your help desk, we can include the old help desk number in the table and assign it to an announcement that provides the new number. At Carverock Fitness, we currently have an announcement that handles all calls coming into unassigned extensions, and it's handled by the pool over in Scottsdale. But we also need to create an announcement for one of our employees that's left the company. Let's take a look at how this is set up. In order to define your announcements with Lync Server 2013, we have to define the announcements in advance, and we do this coming in through the Lync Server management shell. When we're creating the announcements, we can either import an audio file, or we can use text-to-speech translation. So here's a couple of examples. Let's open up our Lync Server management shell. In the first example of a commandlet, I have new-cs announcement. I'm going to create a brand new announcement, and the name is going to be Scottsdale Executive Announcement. We're using a text-to-speech prompt, so we're not importing an audio file, we're going to use text-to-speech. The number that you've called is currently out of service. Please hold while your call is routed to the next available operator. The language that we're using is English US, and this announcement is getting assigned to the application pool called pool.carverockfitness.com. We've also defined an alternate SIP address, so after the recording's played, we'll route the call over to the operator. It's a lot more user-friendly than disconnecting the call. In our second example, we're going to create another announcement. We'll use the new-cs announcement commandlet, and the name of this announcement is Bob Andrews Retirement. Recently, Bob Andrews has retired with the company after 25 years, and he's asked to leave a little bit of information behind for people that call his extension. So we're going to create an announcement. Here you can see it says the number that you've called is currently out of service. Bob has retired after 25 years of dedicated service with the organization. Please hold while your call is transferred to the next available operator. And then once again we have a target URI where we're going to route the call over to an operator. And as you can see from the output on the screen, that commandlet was successful. Once you've imported your audio announcements, whether you're using an audio recording or like in our case using text-to-speech, you then go into the control panel and you define your announcements inside of there. And I know it's a little confusing because we use the term announcement for both of those, but let's go take a look. I'm going to launch my control panel, and then I'm prompted for my pool, and we'll connect to pool.carverockfitness.com in Scottsdale. Then as I'm prompted for my credentials, we'll put in our password. Now that we're inside of the control panel, let's take a look at creating announcements. We'll click on Voice Features and then navigate up to the unassigned numbers. You can see down below that I already have a couple of announcements. Let's take a look at what they look like. When I open up the announcement called Scottsdale Number Ranges, you can see that I've defined a starting number range of +1480 227 1400, and it goes up to $29.99. So if you were to call a number from within this range and it wasn't being used by anybody, well, then what we're going to do here is we're going to route this over to our announcement application. If I look at the drop-down menu choice, you can also route calls over to the Microsoft Exchange Unified Messaging Server. When you choose to route the call over to the announcement application, down below you specify the application server pool that you want to service the call, and then you choose the specific announcement that you want to use. So as another example, if you were to call one of our sales numbers extensions and it's not being used by a salesperson, we're going to play an announcement for you and then route the call over to the sales operator. Well, let's take a look at creating an announcement for Bob Andrews' retirement. We're going to click on New. We'll give it a name. Down below we specify the number range. And then we specify the ending number, which again is going to be the same thing. Underneath that we choose the announcement service, so this is going to be an announcement. We're not going to route this over to Exchange Unified Messaging. We specify the pool that we're going to route this over to, or that will handle the announcement, and that's going to be our pool over in Scottsdale. And next you'll choose your announcement, and in our case it's going to be the Bob Andrews Retirement Announcement. And then we'll click on OK. You'll notice that my announcement is not committed, so we'll click on Commit All. Now before I close out of the console, I see that I have a conflict. You can see that the Bob Andrews telephone number, 480-227-1450, it happens to fall within the Scottsdale number ranges. When your announcements are getting processed, they get processed from the top down. So if you were to call Bob Andrews' number right now, you would actually get the announcement for the Scottsdale number ranges. So what we need to do is take Bob Andrews' retirement announcement and move it up to the top of the list. So now if you were to call Bob Andrews' number, you're going to get his announcement. You're not going to get the announcement for the Scottsdale number ranges. Let's commit all the changes. And we're done with our demonstration. Let's go take a look at automated call distribution. Now that we have seen how to create announcements for calls coming into unassigned numbers, let's take a look at the automated call distribution of the response group application. Microsoft Lync has a built-in support for departmental automated call distribution. It's called response groups. It's a call management feature that enables you to queue calls that are made to specific segments of your organization, such as calls coming into our sales team or help desk, or even the operators. To manage the response groups, we have to configure groups of agents, queues, and workflows. And our workflows can be simple workflows that route the call to a group of agents. They can also be more advanced with IVR, interactive voice response. As we configure the automated call distribution, we're going to be using several tools including the Lync Server control panel, the Lync Server management shell, and a web-based utility called the Response Group Services Configuration tool. When we configure the automated call distribution, calls get routed to groups of agents. We have to go in and define our groups of agents. Agents are clients that are enterprise voice enabled. When we define our group, we define if the clients have to manually sign into the group or if they get signed into the group automatically. We also determine how the calls get routed or dispersed to the members of the group. When calls get routed over to a queue will hold on to calls for a response group until an agent answers the call. When we create or manage our queues, we have to define settings such as the groups that are going to be handling the calls for the queue. So we have to assign groups to the queue and define the order of priority that we want to route the calls to those groups. We also define additional settings such as how to handle calls for a queue that's overflowing or for a queue that's timing out. When we define workflows, the workflows are going to define the behavior of a call from the time it enters into our environment until the time that it's answered by an agent. So as a call enters your workflow, the call gets routed to a queue getting serviced by groups of agents. When you create your workflows, they can be either basic or advanced. A basic workflow is called a hunt group, and it allows you to define settings such as how to handle calls during non-business hours, during holidays, and we can also determine the language to use for our text-to-speech prompts. An advanced workflow also supports interactive voice recognition and response, so we can provide the client with a prompt, and based upon their response, it can dictate which queue we route the call to. Let's take a look at a demonstration on setting up automated call distribution. In this demonstration, we'll see how to set up groups of agents, how to define queues, and also how to create workflows, both simple hunt groups and advanced IVR-based workflows. To configure the automated call distribution, I need to configure groups, queues, and workflows. And we're going to start off our demonstration by opening up the control panel. Inside of our control panel, we're going to connect over to pool.carverockfitness.com. You'll notice the virtual directory. It's our communication server control panel. We'll log in with our administrative credentials, and then we're going to click on Response Groups. You'll notice at the top of the control panel that we can configure workflows, queues, and groups from inside of the control panel. From within the control panel, you really can't configure workflows, but you will have a link over to the Response Group Services Configuration tool, which is a web-based administration portal for creating or editing workflows. You'll notice that when I connect into the console, I'm getting a warning because one of my virtual machines running SQL Server is not up. But that's not going to create a problem for us. So let's take a look at the configuration of groups. Here I'll click on Group. You can see that I've already created a couple of groups. But if you wanted to create a new group, you would click on New. You specify the application server or pool where that group is going to reside. And then you would fill out the property sheets for your group. Let's take a look at my Scottsdale Help Desk. You can see that I gave my group a name. It's called Scottsdale Help Desk. You can provide a description, but that's optional. Underneath your description, you have the participation policy, and that can be set to informal or formal. If your participation policy is set to formal, that means that your clients have to manually sign into the group. If it's set to informal, your clients are automatically signed into the group as soon as they log into Lync. We can also define an alert time, and this defines the number of seconds that a member of the group can be alerted for a call. Now, a very important configuration option is your routing method. And this is where we can define how the calls get routed to the members of the group. Do we want to route the calls to the group based off of who has been idle and available for the longest period of time, longest idle? We can also route the call using parallel, round robin, serial, or the newer technique which is called attendant, allows clients using the attendant console to see the calls in the queue and to pull the calls out of the queue as they see fit. When you define the membership of the group, you have two choices. You can either define a custom group of agents, or you can use an email distribution list that you would have to define. If you choose a custom group of agents, you would click on Select, and then you can find your enterprise voice-enabled users, and then select them and add them to the group. And as you'll notice, I can also prioritize the members of the group. So for example, if I'm using a routing method which is called serial, the serial routing method will route the calls to the members of the group based upon the order in which you're listed. So in this case, if I'm using the serial routing method, the calls would go to A. Arson first before they would go to anybody else if that recipient or that agent was available. Let's click on Cancel. Let's take a look at setting up queues. When you define the properties for your queues, once again you would click on New, and then choose the application server or pool that you want to connect over to. In the case of the Enterprise Edition, you're going to choose a pool. Let's take a look at the Scottsdale Help Desk queue. When you define the properties for a queue, you give it a name, and you also provide a description, but once again that is optional. When a call gets routed to this queue, the call is going to get routed over to my Scottsdale Help Desk group first, and if that group is not available, we'll route the call to the members of the Phoenix Help Desk group. So you can add more than one group to the queue, and you can define which one has a higher priority by moving them up or down inside of the list. At the bottom of the console, you can also enable how to handle a call if your queue is timing out. Do we disconnect the call, or do we forward the call over to a voicemail, a telephone number, a SIP address, or even to another queue? Another extremely important setting is our queue overflow. We have defined a maximum number of calls that can be in the queue, and in here we're using the default which is set to 10. So if all of a sudden call number 11 comes into the queue, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how to handle that. Well, do I want to forward the call based on the newest call or the call that's been sitting in the queue for the longest period of time? Like for example, the queue that we have over in Phoenix. Then I would click on Commit. Let's take a look at setting up our workflows. Now, as I had mentioned, you cannot really configure workflows here from inside of the control panel, but you do have a button to create or edit a workflow, and that will link us over to the Response Group Services Configuration web-based portal. So I'm going to connect over to the web services on Scottsdale. So on the servers over in Scottsdale, my front-end servers, these servers all have that web-based portal, and you can see the link right there, rgsconfig. We're going to log in as administrator, and then we'll click on OK. From inside of the Response Group Configuration tool, you can see that I already have a couple of workflows. You can see the name, the type of workflow, whether it's a basic hunt group simple workflow, or if it's an advanced interactive response group, which is the advanced workflow. Now, if I want to edit an existing workflow, you can edit and you can also delete. If you want to create a new workflow down below, you can define if you want to create a simple workflow called a hunt group, or if you want to define or create an interactive advanced workflow. Now, these workflows are going to look very similar, except when you get to the end of an interactive workflow where you have the ability to prompt your clients with questions, and based upon their response, we can determine which queue to route the call over to. An interactive workflow can have 2 levels of questions with up to 4 responses per question if you create them inside of this console. If you create them from the command line from inside of your Lync Server management shell, you don't have those restrictions. Let's take a look at a simple workflow. Here I've created a simple workflow, and in step number 1 we activate and name the workflow. My workflow is currently active, it's enabled for use by federated users, and I have not enabled the feature called agent anonymity. If you enable this feature, if somebody calls into the workflow, they don't know who they're speaking with. Even if the agent uses instant messaging, it looks like it's coming from the response group application, not from the agent directly. When you create a workflow, it's represented as a contact. Here I have the SIP address, the display name, the telephone number, the display number, and also a description. At the bottom of the console, you'll see where it says workflow type, and we have the choice between managed and unmanaged. Well, this is a new feature with Lync Server 2013. In Lync Server 2013, you have two management roles, and they're available for managing your response groups. We have the Response Group Manager and the Response Group Administrator. Unmanaged response groups have no assigned managers. Only the response group administrators can configure these response groups. Unmanaged workflows have the ability to share queues and agent groups. If we have certain workflows that we want particular administrators to be able to administer, we can define those workflows as being managed, and then we can define who the managers are. In step number 2, we define the language that's used for text-to-speech translation and for speech recognition. Step number 3 allows us to define a welcome message. Thank you for calling Carve Rock Fitness. We appreciate your business and we'll be with you shortly. When you define a welcome message, you can either use text-to-speech or you can upload a recording. Now keep in mind that a workflow will only support one language for text-to-speech or speech recognition. So by using a recording, you can record in multiple languages. It's like a little bit of a workaround. In step number 4, we can define our business hours. And to define your business hours, you can either use a preset schedule, which you would define inside of your Lync Server management shell by using the new-CS RGS hours of business commandlet. Or you can define a custom schedule where you click on the days of the week that you're open and you specify the open time and your close time. We can also define if we want to play a message if somebody calls outside of business hours, using either text-to-speech or a recording. And as you can see, we can also forward the call to another location like a voicemail, a CPRI, or another telephone number. You can also disconnect it. In step number 5, we define how to handle a call that comes in during a holiday. Well, to define your holidays, you have to define the holidays in the command line by using the new-CS RGS holiday commandlet, and then you put your holidays together into a grouping by using the new-CS RGS holiday set commandlet. So if you have defined your holidays and put them into a holiday set, you would be able to choose your holiday set here, and then define if you want to play a message, either text-to-speech or a recording, and then you can choose what to do with the call, whether you disconnect it or forward it to another location. With a simple workflow, all we can do is route the call to a queue, and we can define if we want to use the music on hold provided by Microsoft, or if we want to use our own music on hold file. Let's click on Cancel. Now let's take a look at an interactive advanced workflow that has IVR. The advanced workflows are going to look almost identical. Step number 1, you activate and name your workflow. Step number 2, you select your language. Number 3, we have our welcome message, and number 4, we have our business hours. In step number 5, we specify our holidays. Step number 6 is your music on hold, and step number 7 is where things change. You can see in step number 7, this is where the interactive voice response comes in. We can define a prompt using either text-to-speech or a recording, and based upon the response coming back from the caller, we'll dictate how we handle the call. So for example, for application support, press or say 1. For mail support, press or say 2. So if you come back with the first response of 1, whether you're using a voice response or a keypad response, we can either send the call to a queue or we can ask you another question. And that second question can also have 4 responses, and each of those responses can have a corresponding queue. And we're going to close out of the console. In this demonstration, we've seen how to create or edit groups, queues, and workflows. I hope you've enjoyed the demonstration, and we'll see you in the next video.